afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today is Monday, September 12th of the year 2022. The last time we met, it was still the month of August. If you're joining along with us, you can thank Restream.io. That's how we're able to broadcast to all these different places at the same time. So if you're watching us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, it's because of Restream. This is Scriptural Salvation Baptist Tabernacle. My name is Andy. Welcome to my living room. To my left, right in front of me, is Paul. To his left is Richard, who was off script. There's Richard's hand. Yes.
There it wants to see your camera.
And there's Richard's face. We have Steve is kind of cut in half right there. Yeah.
Steve, you're cutting brother.
And then, all right, so to my right, we have Hannah and Grace and Jacob. And my wife, Elizabeth, is right off camera. And the dog is in there somewhere, and the baby is upstairs sleeping right now.
You guys can see the door.
On the camera.
It's kind of dark over there. So, like I said, thank you for joining us if you're joining us live. If you're watching this replay, we thank you for doing that too. It's the magic of that thing called the internet. Yeah, maybe I will move the camera a little bit.
Never heard of that before. Yeah.
Maybe I will.
I'm turning it like more and more.
I think that
Yeah,
was
There we go.
better that way, but okay.
See?
So for the past few weeks, on Sunday mornings, we've been attending morning services at a church called Oneida Lake Congregational Church. My schedule and the whole reason why we do services here on Monday makes it so that we can't go every Sunday, and I also cannot accept any type of position where I'm full-time pastor at a Sunday-only church. So we will continue doing here on Mondays, but it's nice to get out there and see how different groups meet and worship, get a little bit of traditional church in them, but also get together and do something a little bit different here on Mondays for the people that can't go to regular Sunday church. And with that being said, we will start off with a traditional hymn called Nothing But the Blood of Jesus, and this is in bluegrass style. So you'll hear a lot of banjo here, but Nothing But the Blood of Jesus.
Yeah.
Gotta hire a professional AV guy to be able to do all this. It would go a lot faster. But till then, you're stuck like this. Nothing but the blood. And
What did I cost like $1,000 or something?
they would cost money. So I can't afford it.
You can't afford it. I thought you had money.
What can wash away my sin? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can make me whole again? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. No other fount I know. Nothing but the blood of Jesus.
nothing but the blood of Jesus. This is all my righteousness, nothing but the blood of Jesus. Oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. No other fount I know, nothing but the blood of Jesus. Oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. No other fount I know, nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can
Wash away my sin. I don't know why it did that.
it completely cut out?
All right. Okay. So with that being said, let me get back to this. Let me cut off that. So this week, after a few weeks ago, we finished our journey through the book of Genesis, and we learned about beginnings, and we left the Hebrew people segregated in northern Egypt. Okay. I don't know why you didn't have that snack earlier, but okay. We are going to pick up the story of the Hebrew people in the land of Egypt, but through the book of Exodus.
Oh.
But, like I did through the book of Genesis, I like to find things in the historical record that match up with the Bible. So I will be also going through, and we will be looking at things that help confirm what the Bible is telling us in its narrative. So we'll be looking at who the different pharaohs would have been, who the different people would have been, because the Bible doesn't give us the names of the pharaohs that are in the book of Exodus. Like if you go through and you'll see YouTube videos will say things like pharaohs named in the Bible. No, they weren't named. They were just called Pharaoh. So there are hundreds of people named Pharaoh. So we will instead be looking at who those people could have been. And I call that biblical Egyptology. Biblical Egyptology. When we went through the book of Genesis and we talked about how genetics worked in the book of Genesis with Noah and the ark, here we're going to talk about Egyptology, or the study of Egyptian history.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. But I need you to be here. There we
Fire, monster.
go. All right. So, perfect. Okay. So we'll start reading through Psalm number 46.
Oh, sorry. God is our refuge, refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea. Though its waters grow and form, though the mountains tremble whose streams make glad next
Make glad the city of God.
the city of God, the holy
Habitation.
Oh my gosh,
You had the word earlier.
of the Most High.
You had that word earlier.
I just said that.
And then you forgot it. So that word there, Most High in capitals, is actually capitalized because it is one of the names that the Bible uses for God Himself. And we learned this Hebrew name for Most High, and is El Elyon, God Most High. So here it is. You remember El Elyon?
No, it's going to say God Most High.
So El Elyon is God Most High. Not to be confused with my favorite, which is El Shaddai,
El
God
Shaddai.
Almighty.
Oh, yeah. God is in the
Midst.
midst. She shall not be moved. God will help her. Will help her when morning dawns. The
Nations.
nations rage. The kingdoms
Totter.
totter. He
Utters his voice.
utters his voice. The earth melts.
Yes, very good.
The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Salah. Come behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth.
Oh, so I know why you picked it for Jacob. Because it says Jacob in it.
He makes wars
Cease.
cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots. Chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth.
The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress.
I gotta say, Michael apology. Bye.
There. So, a common held misbelief that you hear often is you hear about the Hebrew Israelite people being taken into slavery and how when they were in slavery, they built the Great Pyramid. And when you're reading about how the Hebrews are slaves in the book of Exodus, it is the Great Pyramid that they are building. This is very common held belief that people have.
Wow.
So if you've been living under a rock for your entire life and don't know what the Great Pyramid looks like, it's that big one in the middle. All right.
I have been living under a rock my life.
So we're not sure exactly when, but the date that most historians agree that the Great Pyramid was built was in the year 2560 BC. And we'll be talking about why all these BC dates are not reliable, 100% reliable, but they're close. But the year 2560 BC was a very long time ago. If we're in the year 2020 AD, this is 2,500 years before 2020 years ago. But it was built for the Pharaoh Khufu.
We're not in the year 2020
2020 AD. 2022 AD.
Oh, no, that's
So it wasn't until the 1850s BC, that Jacob and his sons arrived in Egypt. So we were able to look at the evidence in the book of Genesis and the style of housing changes in northern Egypt when the Israelites got there, the canal of Joseph that was built around that time. So we dated the time of uh, the Israelites getting to Egypt about 1850 BC. So as you see, it's much later than when the pyramid is built. It's roughly 700 years after the Great Pyramid is built that the Israelites make it to Egypt. So the Israelites were not the ones that built the Great Pyramid. So,
I thought 250 BC would be after.
so when you're dealing with BC, higher years come before smaller years. Because when you go to BC, it goes backwards. So 2560 is later than 1850. All right?
BC means before Christ, right?
Yes. So 700 years before the Hebrews even set foot in Egypt, they've already built the Great Pyramid. By the time Cleopatra rules, right around the time of Jesus Christ, the pyramids were so ancient that the people in Egypt at that time were studying the Great Pyramids as ancient wonders. They were amazed at how great and old they were. So they were long built before the Hebrews even got to Egypt. There is uncertain chronological dating though. Why did it do that to me? Come on.
Why?
Okay.
Thank you.
And there's uncertain chronological dating for a number of reasons. One, because we're going back so many years in history. Two, because ancient people use different calendars and they use different dating methods than we here in the modern era do. And also, when it comes to the kingdoms of Egypt, there are definite reasons why it would be difficult to date back this far. In Egypt, there are three distinctive kingdom periods where different dynasties of pharaohs ruled. And Egypt started, before the Great Pyramid time in the 2560s BC, was something called the Old Kingdom. And there were a bunch of pharaohs that ruled. And then when it got to a point where their kingdom was in crisis and nobody was able to inherit from that old line of pharaohs, it passed into a dark period in Egyptian history where we don't know how long it lasted and things weren't kept accurately. So then we have a middle kingdom that sprouts up, and there are a bunch of pharaohs in there. And during the middle kingdom of Egypt is where Joseph becomes the second in command to one of the pharaohs of the middle kingdom. But then, very close to after Joseph and all his family move into Egypt, that line of Egyptian pharaohs loses its reign, and Egypt is plunged into a crisis, and we lose our chronological tracking again in a second dark period in Egyptian history. And then a new kingdom sprouts up, and during this new kingdom is when Moses comes into the picture. So and then we even have a dark period between Moses and when the Egyptian kingdom that gets taken over by the Greeks and the Romans comes into effect. So all these dark periods in Egyptian history make for very hard chronological accurate dating.
Wow.
It's not related.
So Joseph, we talked about when we dated the events that happened near Joseph. We dated him that the pharaoh that he knew was Pharaoh Amenemhat III. And Pharaoh Amenemhat III was in the middle kingdom of Egypt. Pharaoh Amenemhat III had a very long reign, and his reign talked about reigning through famines, and they built the Canal Bar Youssef, which was the Canal of Joseph, that helped build secondary irrigation so that Egypt had extra food during this tragedy. And then after Amenemhat III came his son Amenemhat IV. He only ruled 9 years. And Amenemhat IV had a queen take over for him, Sobek Nefru, and she only ruled for 4 years, and then that entire dynasty of Egyptian pharaohs stopped. And so those dark period that I'm talking about slides in right here after this Sobek Nefru. So a short 13 years after the pharaoh that knew Joseph, Egypt is plunged into a dark age, and our chronological dating gets very inaccurate. This second period in between the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom is called the Hyksos Intermediary Period. And the Hyksos Intermediary Period, foreigners come in and rule Egypt. And the foreigners that came in and ruled Egypt during this time, their origin, they were Canaanites. The Hebrews at their origins were a Canaanite people. So the very people that were related to the Hebrews came in and were the pharaohs of Egypt. So in the kingdom of Egypt, you have a language change, you have illiterate scribes that didn't speak the language, things aren't getting documented, you have different calendars being brought in. So it is very, very hard to date things accurately to this period. It is also possible that maybe these Hyksos Canaanites were friendly to the Hebrews that lived in the northern part of Egypt because they were similar in origins. Maybe it was. Maybe the Hebrews prospered there. Somebody getting a phone call? No. Thought I heard a phone call. No? All right. I was going to say, I hope it's better be God Almighty calling you because we're busy. Okay. But it's possible that these Canaanite Hyksos were friendly to the Hebrews because the Egyptians, as we talked about, were not. They were very segregated society. What's interesting is the Hyksos moved the ruling capital of Egypt from a city named Memphis, which was farther down the Nile, to a city called Avaris, which was in Goshen. Now, I've mentioned the word and land Goshen before when we were talking about in Genesis. That comes into play later. And now we will listen to Exodus 1 through 7.
Yay.
Exodus 1 through 7. Pretty sure.
The Book of Exodus, Chapter 1. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them.
I don't like it when it says percent. It's people or person or people. Sometimes people say numbers. I mean, I get mad at that. But person.
So it's a short little piece there. As we talked about, the whole family of Jacob moves down into Egypt, and they're segregated from the Egyptian people because the Egyptian people had a segregated society. They view foreigners as outsiders, and that is the whole reason why the Hebrew people have survived living here in Egypt. Now they're segregated because they live in a separate area from the rest of the Egyptians. And does anybody remember the land that the Israelites lived in when they lived in Egypt?
Isn't it Canaan?
No.
What?
That was the land that they came from. I've actually mentioned the word that they were living in already.
Amaris?
That was a city.
Ah, come on.
Is it the? I forgot what it's called. It's that.
Goshen. The Hebrew people, the 70 relatives of Jacob and Joseph, lived in the land of Goshen in northern Egypt, and that is also the land where the Hyksos Canaanite peoples ruled Egypt during the Dark Period. But the people of Israel were fruitful. It was perfect conditions for them. They were segregated from the rest of the Egyptians. They didn't have to worry about the other Canaanites in the land of Canaan absorbing their family. Things were perfect for them in Goshen. Being fruitful and multiplying is one of the themes of the book of Genesis. We hear that several times, from creation through Noah and the ark, through Abraham and all of his descendants. Be fruitful and multiply. And here we are in Exodus, and they're doing it. So, we'll listen to verses 8 through 14, if I can find the mouse cursor. Okay. Oh, no, I just keep this in. Okay.
Excuse me.
Okay, verses 8 through 14.
Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph, and he said to his people, Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves, and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick, and all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves.
Do you remember the land that the Israelites moved into when they moved into Egypt back in Genesis? What was the name? Okay, Goshen. You weren't here. I offered everybody to try to say it, and they didn't remember it. Now, around 1550 BC, Pharaoh Ahmose I expelled the Hyksos from Egypt. The Hyksos being the Canaanite people that were ruling. When the Bible says that a new king arose that didn't know Joseph, this, I believe, it is this Pharaoh Ahmose I is the person. Now he kicks out all of the Hyksos and takes over Egypt as an Egyptian. But he, like I said, doesn't remember Joseph, and he doesn't know the blessing that Joseph being in Egypt brings to the Egyptian people. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them. The Egyptians start to enslave the Hebrew people. They make them work exceedingly hard because they don't want the Hebrew people to take over Egypt. Now, the descendants of Israel and his family weren't there as conquerors. They were there to live peacefully alongside them. So it wasn't their aim to take over, but the Egyptians, in their fear and segregation of foreign people, thought that for sure that these multiplying Hebrews that are running around like rabbits everywhere were just going to rise up and take over. The Egyptians have them build entire cities for them. And the name of two of these important cities are Pithom and Ramesses. Now, we've talked about this in the book of Genesis, where a lot of people date the Exodus wrong, thinking that Ramses is the pharaoh of the Exodus because it says that the Hebrew people built the city of Ramesses. But what all that was is that later on, people wrote this as the city of Ramesses so that they would know where it was. Originally, this city was Avaris. Now, Avaris is important because that's where the Hyksos ruled Egypt from when they were there. So it all comes together. It all starts to pan out. And when it says, and made their lives bitter with hard service, to this day, whenever an Israeli person celebrates the Passover, they have something where they eat bitter herbs. And what it does is it reminds them of their slavery when they lived in Egypt. What I'd like to do sometimes is, sometime with you kids, I'd love to have you sit through what an actual Passover is. It's really fascinating to watch actual Jewish people do a Passover meal. It's actually kind of fun because it's tradition that they've had since this time in the 1500s BC. They go all the way to today. What? Yes, I have.
What?
Yep, I've gone and sat at a Passover meal, two of them before. It is very, very cool. It's very cool. And then one time for church, we got together and we tried to do our own Passover. Didn't go quite what this was. We didn't follow everything we were supposed to, but it was still very interesting.
I don't remember.
This was actually, I think Paul was a baby
Yeah.
when we did it. Yeah, because we were still living in Park Drive at the time. So this was, or we might have just moved on to Court. Anyway, it was before we moved into this house. So we'll listen to verses 15 through 22 and finish off the first chapter.
Before you start, how many chapters are in this one?
The Exodus? Actually, I don't know. I don't think there's 50. But it was a good guess because Genesis had 50, right? Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this? And let the male children live. The midwife said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews, you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live.
Sounds a little harsh.
Yeah.
All right. So basically what this chapter is saying is the midwives are commanded to take every male born and kill him before they're able to be raised right after their birth. But the midwives won't do this, and they say to Pharaoh, well, the Hebrew women are so fast at giving childbirth that before we can even get in there and help, the babies are born and they're gone, so we don't have a chance to do it. So then the Pharaoh says, you know what? Well, if you're not going to do your job, we're just going to take all of the males and throw them in the Nile River. Because we're living under they don't want the Hebrews to get so strong and take over. So, yes, very good. Now we will start chapter 2. So, like I said, it's just a short little blurb, and that's what we take out of it. So, chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. Here, we meet very. Did I hit the right button? What? Here, chapter 2. There we go. Oh, no, I already did it. Okay. Back. Stop this. Two verses 1 through 10.
Oh, yeah, never mind.
Exodus 2. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river bank, and his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of the water."
Okay.
Isn't this one of our vegetables?
Well, it probably was a VeggieTales episode.
Yes, it was.
Now, there were 3 pharaohs that served during this time that we can go and look at the Egyptian records. Now, Ahmose, we said, was the one that drove out the Hyksos, and he had a son named Amenhotep the first. Now, Amenhotep had a son named Tutmose the first. Now, it's very tough to say which of these pharaohs had absolute power because they would make their son serve as co-king with them at certain times. So it's tough to date with accuracy any of the time of these pharaohs. But these were the 3 pharaohs that were serving during this time. So it was either Amenhotep the first or Tutmose the first that said, "We're going to take all the Hebrew babies and throw them in the Nile." And Tutmose the first is the one, he actually had a daughter that's in the record. Now, I think that it is Tutmose that is the pharaoh when Moses is born. Now, Tutmose the first. Now, here we are to Moses, and when it says that Moses was placed in a basket and floated down the Nile River, the Hebrew word written in the Bible for what we translate as basket is actually the same Hebrew word for ark, like Noah and his ark. And what's fascinating is they used pitch to seal them both shut so that they wouldn't sink into the water. They were both boats that were put into the water, and they're both vessels that delivered people and saved them. So these are two things that are similar, that use the same word, that mean very similar things. So just a little bit here, a little bit of neat trivia. The word, whenever you read that Moses was placed in a basket, he was placed in an ark. Now, Tutmos I had two important children. He had a son, Tutmos II, and he had a daughter named Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut.
Yeah.
Now, I think that Pharaoh's daughter that draws Moses up out of the Nile and keeps him as her own is this Hatshepsut. What's fascinating is she goes on, rules with her brother Tutmos II, and when Tutmos II dies, she actually stays and is the queen of Egypt. She's a pharaoh. But I believe she is the one that drew Moses out of the Nile. And you can go and look in the Egyptian records and find her in there. Moses means to draw out, because they reached into the water and drew out the basket, the ark. Like I said, I believe Hatshepsut is the princess, the daughter of the pharaoh at the time, Tutmos I, and Moses' older sister Miriam says to Hatshepsut, "Can I go get a Hebrew woman to be the nurse for the baby?" And Hatshepsut says, "Yes, go ahead." And Moses' older sister goes and gets Moses' mother to raise him in their Hebrew home, even though he's considered Egyptian royalty. So Moses has a very interesting upbringing. He's raised as an Egyptian royal. So, and there we have it. Next, I like this word, but anytime you go to look it up, it always brings you to Sojourner Truth from the Civil War. But we will now be reading through Exodus 2:11 through 22. Through 22.
One day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, behold, two Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, "Why do you strike your companion?" He answered, "Who made you a prince and judge over us? Do you mean to kill me, as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "Surely the thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. When they came home to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come home so soon today?" They said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him, that he may eat bread." And Moses was content to dwell with the man. And he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. She gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land."
One day, when Moses had grown up, he was 40 years old. A lot of times, people picture Moses growing up, being like 13 or 14 years old, walking out and seeing the events that he saw. No, he was 40. So he was living in the royal palace with the family of Hatshepsut and Thutmose. And he's 40 years old, and he goes out, and the Egyptian is beating a Hebrew slave, and he kills the Egyptian. Yep, I mentioned all these names. During this time, Thutmose II, Hatshepsut, and Thutmose III are all pharaohs, and we're going to go to roughly the 1450s BC. He kills the Egyptian that is beating a Hebrew because he knows that the Hebrews are his people. But when he sees two Hebrew people arguing, they don't see the bigger picture. They only see that they're arguing amongst themselves. They don't worry that they have to band together to fight off the common enemy. They only think about themselves. So Moses gets nervous because everybody knows that he killed an Egyptian, and people are just going to rat him in, and he'll end up getting killed. So he takes off and leaves. But Moses fled and stayed in the land of Midian. Land of Midian. If we look at ancient Egypt, we've got Goshen up here in the Nile Delta. And he ran all the way over here to the land of Midian. So he was out of the jurisdiction of Pharaoh in Egypt. Here is all wilderness. We'll learn about this later. He goes all the way over here. Moses runs away. It's self-preservation at this point. He wants to keep himself alive. He sits down by a well. And so far, through the book of Genesis, anytime we have a well figure into a story, it has to do with dating and matchmaking. Rebecca, the wife of Isaac, met her husband, was chosen for her husband because of meeting somebody at a well. And Rachel, the same thing. Rachel is the favored wife of Jacob, and she meets her husband watering flocks at a well. Now, here we have Moses sitting down at a well and being a big, strong hero, saving a bunch of Midianite daughters of a certain Midianite priest. He is their hero. So he goes back to the house of the house where there are these 7 daughters that live, and he's given one of the daughters to be his wife, Zipporah, and they have a son named Gershom. Gershom means sojourner, and sojourner in English is just a temporary stay. So multiple times in the book of Genesis, we see people leaving Canaan and going down into Egypt for a sojourn. They're just there temporarily to get away from things, and then they go back. And Moses is having a sojourn here in Midian, and he's going to go back eventually. So it's a temporary stay. Yes?
What happened to Joseph and everyone?
Well, at the very beginning, it said that
Joseph died.
yeah, but Joseph, he had died off, and this is probably a couple hundred years later that we run into Moses, because we have that. I'm talking about that that dark period where we can't get the dates right, where the Hyksos come in, and during that time, we're not sure exactly how long it is, but then Moses comes along. So here we are, a couple hundred years after. Joseph and all of his brothers die, and now here we are with Moses. Now we're going to follow the story of Moses through the book of Exodus. He's a very important character. We're going to finish off this chapter, chapter 2, with verses 23 through 25. Okay.
During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew.
That's what it says. God knew and did.
And God knew. So here, we've been talking about Tutmos II and ruling with Hatshepsut, and Moses goes off to Midian, and while he's off in Midian for 40 years. And in the historical record, we had Queen Hatshepsut ruling, and then we had Hatshepsut's son, Tutmos II. And Tutmos II dies right around the time that Moses comes back to Egypt. So the historical record fits. Now, but it also says something I find kind of strange. And God remembered his covenant with the people. But did God really forget, though? Does anybody think that God actually forgot? No. It was actually foretold earlier in the book of Genesis that the people of Israel, the Hebrews, would be in Egypt for 400 years. So their time in Egypt here is playing out. God is letting it play out. It's just that the people at that time living through it, if you lived during that period of time, you would have thought that God forgot about you. If people don't get an instant answer today, the things that they ask, they think that people forgot about them or that nobody's listening to them. The people of Israel had to wait 400 years to be saved from their slavery in Egypt. 400 years.
Oh my lord.
They had to have patience. And what this teaches us is that you need to have patience in your life. And just for kicks, we'll go back to this picture.
I'm not going to be patient if I have to wait
400 years. I don't think you'd be able to wait 400 years.
Uh-huh. I'd probably be dead by then anyway.
That was the point. So, like I said, land of Midian, far away from Egypt. And
that's it. And
that is our introduction to the book of Exodus and some of the things that show up in the historical record, pharaohs that actually existed that could have been the characters that play into the story of Moses. And really, Hannah.
Sorry.
And now we will finish off with a song.
Oh, yeah, communion.
Nope.
Why does it look like
No.
it's invisible?
There we go. So,
Light of the world, you step down into darkness. Open my eyes, let me see beauty that made this heart adore you. Hope of a life spent with you. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. King of all days, oh oh so highly exalted, glorious in heaven above. Humbly you came to the earth you created, all for love's sake became poor. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me.
That is a pretty song.
No.
Now, you know what? I think we might have enough time to try that one more time.
What?
Because I like that song. So, let's see here.
Why are we doing it all the time?
Because I like that song. Thought I answered that.
What?
The world you step down into darkness, open my eyes, let me see beauty that made this heart adore you, hope of a life spent with you. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. King of all days, oh so highly exalted, glorious in heaven above. Humbly you came to the earth you created, all for love's sake became poor. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me.
All right.
I come to the garden.
No, that I'm pretty sure I stopped that. Okay.
Hey, buddy, play that again.
So, let's see. Now here we are at the end of the first week, looking into Exodus, learning how the biblical record fits into the historical record, how the dates that historians set and they treat them as if they're etched in stone and gold might not be 100% completely true, because historians are always right. No. No. All right, right, Paul. But the Bible is always right. The Bible is always right. So,
Ding, ding, ding.
here we are. Thank you for joining us this week, looking into a very, very important character in Moses and the wonderful things that he's going to do. If you liked the service, thank you for enjoying it. And if you didn't like the service, I thank you for watching it this far. Hopefully, you join us next week as we move through the book of Exodus. I pray that everybody has a good week, and I hope maybe that you learned something out of this. In Jesus' name, amen.
Goodbye.